night sky over the Jordanian desert was shattered by a low, persistent humming sound, reminiscent of a lawnmower engine. It was not the roar of a $1 million fighter jet or the hiss of a sophisticated cruise missile. It was the sound of a cheap, mass-produced drone assembled from off-the-shelf electronics available on any global e-commerce site. Minutes later, a massive explosion rocked a United States military outpost, leaving behind burning wreckage and a question that now haunts the highest levels of the Pentagon. How did a device costing less than $20,000 bypass the most advanced defense network on Earth? We are witnessing the dawn of a new era of warfare where the traditional rules of military might are being turned upside down. For decades, the United States military has built its global dominance on the foundation of massive aircraft carriers, F-35 stealth fighters, and billion-dollar Patriot missile systems. But today, these symbols of power are facing a lethal asymmetric threat. This is no longer just a conflict between superpowers with massive nuclear stockpiles. It is a war between high-end, incredibly expensive technology and swarms of low-cost suicide drones that are capable of delivering a knockout blow. Imagine a Patriot missile system where each interceptor costs $4 million, being forced to fire at a target that costs only $20,000. This is not just a technical failure, it is an economic disaster in a war of attrition. Iran and its regional proxies have identified this vulnerability. Instead of facing the overwhelming firepower of the United States and Israel head-on, they have mastered the art of drone warfare. These devices are small, slow, and fly at low altitudes, making them nearly invisible to radar systems designed to track high-speed targets at long ranges. When dozens or even hundreds of these drones attack in a coordinated swarm, they easily overwhelm the processing capabilities of even the most modern defense systems. This crisis is pushing the United States military into a difficult dilemma. Continue to burn billions of dollars to intercept these metal mosquitoes, or watch as strategic assets worth billions are threatened by cheap technological toys. What is happening at the Strait of Hormuz and at bases in Iraq and Syria is not just a series of isolated skirmishes, but proof that the geopolitical balance of power is shifting in ways no one predicted. Power no longer belongs solely to the wealthiest, but to those who can use technology in the most clever and ruthless ways. The terrifying reality of this new form of attrition lies in the cold, hard mathematics of modern interceptor missiles versus mass-produced suicide drones. When a Shahed series drone, often dubbed the moped of the sky due to its noisy engine, enters a combat zone, it forces the defender to make a choice that is fundamentally unsustainable. To protect a multi-billion-dollar airbase, or a 1,000-person barracks, the United States military must deploy its most advanced shields, such as the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or the Patriot systems. Each time the fire button is pressed, the American taxpayer is essentially launching a luxury mansion into the sky to destroy a target that costs less than a used compact car. This economic imbalance is a deliberate strategy employed by adversaries to bleed the United States dry, not through a single decisive battle, but through 1,000 tiny, inexpensive cuts. Geopolitical analysts point out that the proliferation of this technology has democratized air power, allowing non-state actors and smaller nations to challenge a superpower's aerial hegemony for the first time in history. In the past, achieving air superiority required an industrial base capable of producing advanced jet engines and stealth coatings. Today, it only requires a steady supply of lithium batteries, basic GPS modules, and fiber-reinforced plastic. The simplicity of these weapons is their greatest strength. Because they are slow and have a low radar cross-section, they often blend into the clutter of the horizon, tricking the automated logic of high-speed radar systems designed to ignore birds or small civilian craft. By the time the system identifies the threat as a lethal weapon, it is often too late to react with anything other than a multi-million-dollar missile. This is the cost-exchange ratio trap, a strategic nightmare where the winner of the tactical engagement, the one who shoots down the drone, is actually the loser in the long-term economic war. As these drones become more autonomous, utilizing basic artificial intelligence to navigate without a direct satellite link, they become even harder to jam or intercept. We are no longer talking about a future threat. We are talking about a current, clear, and present danger that has already resulted in the loss of American lives and the damage of critical infrastructure across the Middle East. The Pentagon is now frantically searching for directed energy weapons, like high-powered lasers or microwaves, to reset this equation. But until those technologies are perfected and deployed at scale, the advantage remains firmly with the cheap and the deadly. Deep within the industrial complexes of Iran, a revolution was born not from cutting-edge laboratories, but from the grim necessity of surviving under decades of intense international sanctions. Denied access to high-end aerospace components and Western military technology, Iranian engineers turned to the vast and often unregulated global marketplace of consumer electronics. They realized that a lethal weapon did not need a specialized military-grade computer when the processor inside a modern smartphone or a high-end civilian drone toy was already more powerful than the guidance systems used in the Badavkast, early days of the space race. This Frankenstein approach to weapons manufacturing has allowed Tehran to bypass the walls of economic isolation with shocking effectiveness. They have successfully sourced miniature internal combustion engines, originally designed for hobbyist remote-controlled planes in Europe or Asia, and scaled them up to carry 50-kilogram warheads over distances of more than 2,000 kilometers. These are not the sleek, supersonic predators seen in Hollywood movies. They are rugged, simple, and terrifyingly efficient. By utilizing civilian global positioning system signals, combined with basic inertial navigation units, these drones can fly autonomously toward pre-programmed coordinates with surprising accuracy. The true genius of this strategy lies in its inherent redundancy and the ruthless logic of the numbers game. If 10 drones are shot down but the 11th one manages to strike an oil refinery, a power grid, or an ammunition depot, the attacker has achieved a strategic victory at a tiny fraction of the cost of a single traditional cruise missile. This is the philosophy of saturation attacks, a tactic specifically designed to exploit the physical and logical limits of modern defensive hardware. Every air defense battery, no matter how advanced, has a finite number of interceptor missiles and a maximum number of individual targets it can track and engage simultaneously. When a swarm of 30 or 40 drones appears on a radar screen, it forces the defensive system to exhaust its entire magazine in a matter of seconds, leaving the high-value target completely vulnerable to a second or third follow-up wave. This reality is fundamentally changing the way military commanders think about base security and maritime protection. For the first time since the end of the Second World War, American ground troops must constantly scan the horizon for a threat that is small, relatively silent, and capable of appearing anywhere at any time. The psychological toll on service members is immense, as the traditional concept of safe zones behind the front lines is rapidly evaporating. Every supply convoy, every radar station, and every temporary tent city is now a potential target for a $20,000 flying bomb. This rapid proliferation of low-cost aerial technology is not confined to the Middle East anymore. From the frozen battlefields of Eastern Europe to the critical shipping lanes of the Red Sea, the world is watching a live demonstration of how cheap innovation is stripping away the immunity once enjoyed by the world's most powerful nations. The geopolitical consequences are staggering, as even the smallest regional militias can now project power across international borders and influence global oil prices by simply launching a handful of plastic and metal birds into the night sky. The era of the expensive, invincible fortress is over, replaced by a chaotic landscape where the cheap and the many are winning against the few and the elite. The tragedy at Tower 22 in Jordan serves as a grim case study for the tactical nightmare facing American commanders. On that fateful night, a single enemy drone managed to shadow a returning American drone, mimicking its flight path and radar signature so perfectly that the base's automated identification systems were completely deceived. By the time the personnel on the ground realized the incoming craft was not their own, the explosion had already occurred, claiming the lives of 3 American service members and wounding dozens more. This incident highlighted a terrifying vulnerability: the inability of current technology to consistently distinguish between friend and foe in a crowded, low-altitude airspace. Traditional air defense systems like the Patriot were designed during the Cold War to intercept high-speed ballistic missiles and supersonic bombers flying at high altitudes. They are optimized to filter out small, slow-moving objects to prevent the system from being triggered by a flock of birds or a weather balloon. Modern suicide drones exploit this very logic by flying low and slow, effectively hiding within the radar clutter of the Earth's surface. Even the most sophisticated Aegis-class destroyers, equipped with some of the most advanced radar arrays in the world, have struggled when faced with coordinated attacks in the narrow waters of the Red Sea. The challenge is not just technical, but operational. When a swarm of 50 drones is launched simultaneously, the defensive crew has only seconds to identify each individual threat, calculate its trajectory, and prioritize targets. If the system is set to be too sensitive, it risks shooting down friendly assets or civilian aircraft. If it is too cautious, the results are catastrophic. This has led to a frantic search for non-kinetic solutions. Electronic warfare, which involves jamming the radio frequencies or GPS signals used by the drones, was once thought to be the ultimate answer. However, adversaries have quickly adapted by using shielded components or programming drones to switch to inertial navigation systems that do not rely on external signals. This rapid cycle of move and countermove is happening in weeks, not years, far outpacing the traditional procurement cycles of the Pentagon. While a new fighter jet takes 20 years to develop, a new drone software patch can be written in 20 hours. The United States is now pouring billions of dollars into directed energy weapons, such as high-powered lasers that can melt a drone's sensors or microwave bursts that can fry its internal circuitry. These weapons offer the promise of a nearly infinite magazine and a cost per shot of less than $1. But as of today, these systems remain largely experimental or deployed in limited numbers. They face significant hurdles, including atmospheric interference from dust, rain, or fog, which can scatter the laser beam and reduce its effectiveness. Furthermore, the psychological weight on the soldiers stationed in these high-risk areas cannot be overstated. Living under the constant threat of a silent, invisible killer that can strike at any hour of the day or night creates a level of sustained stress that traditional combat does not. Every buzzing sound in the distance, every unidentified blip on a monitor becomes a potential life or death decision. This is the reality of the drone crisis. It is not just a battle of hardware, but a battle of nerves and endurance. As these cheap, deadly machines continue to proliferate, they are forcing the world's most powerful military to rethink its entire approach to force protection and regional stability. Beyond the immediate tactical threat to military personnel, the drone crisis has metastasized into a global economic strangulation that is redefining the concept of maritime security. Nowhere is this more evident than in the narrow, turbulent waters of the Red Sea and the Bab al-Mandab Strait. Here, a relatively small regional militia, the Houthi movement, has utilized Iranian drone technology to hold the carotid artery of global trade hostage. For over a century, the ability to control the high seas was reserved for nations with massive blue water navies and multi-billion-dollar aircraft carriers. Today, that paradigm has been shattered. With a handful of $20,000 drones launched from the back of a pickup truck in the Yemeni mountains, a non-state actor has forced the world's largest shipping conglomerates to abandon the Suez Canal and reroute their vessels around the Cape of Good Hope. This massive detour adds thousands of miles to every journey, burns millions of gallons of extra fuel, and injects a toxic level of inflation into the global supply chain. The United States and its allies responded by launching Operation Prosperity Guardian, a multinational naval task force intended to restore order. Yet, despite the presence of the most advanced guided missile destroyers in existence, the threat remains persistent and pervasive. The financial math remains the same. The cost of the interceptor missiles used to defend a single cargo ship often exceeds the value of the cargo itself. This is the ultimate expression of asymmetric power. The Houthis do not need to sink an American destroyer to win. They only need to create enough chaos to make the shipping lanes uninsurable. Global insurance premiums for vessels transiting the region have skyrocketed, and some firms have ceased coverage entirely for ships linked to Western nations. This has created a security tax on every gallon of oil and every shipping container moving from Asia to Europe. Geopolitically, this signifies a historic shift. We are entering an era where small, motivated groups can exert veto power over global commerce using low-cost autonomous systems. The United States Navy, which has secured the world's oceans since the end of the Second World War, is finding that its traditional tools of deterrence are increasingly ineffective against this decentralized and disposable threat. A carrier strike group, while still a formidable instrument of national power, is a massive and expensive target that must be defended at all times, whereas a drone launcher can be hidden in a garage and replaced for the price of a mid-sized sedan. This disparity is forcing a painful reevaluation of naval doctrine. Military strategists are now questioning the wisdom of concentrating so much power into a few vulnerable platforms when the adversary is spreading their lethality across thousands of small, cheap units. The drone crisis in the Red Sea is a loud wake-up call that the era of uncontested maritime dominance is fading. It reveals a world where the lines between high-tech warfare and low-tech insurgency have blurred into a single, continuous spectrum of conflict. As the costs of these disruptions mount, the pressure on Washington to find a definitive solution grows. But in a world where the enemy is everywhere and nowhere, where the weapon is as cheap as a used car and as deadly as a cruise missile, traditional military victory is becoming an increasingly elusive concept. The global economy is now tethered to the reliability of a sensor and the speed of an interceptor, and as long as the drones keep flying, the world remains one lucky hit away from an economic catastrophe. As we look toward the horizon of the 21st century, the drone crisis serves as a brutal reminder that military superiority is never a permanent state. The democratization of destruction is no longer a theoretical concern. It is a lived reality for every commander in the field and every policymaker in Washington. The era where a single nation could project undisputed power through massive, centralized platforms is being replaced by a fragmented and volatile landscape of swarming, decentralized threats. In response, The United States military is beginning to embark on its most significant strategic pivot since the end of the Cold War. The Pentagon has recently launched initiatives like Replicator, a massive effort to field thousands of low-cost, autonomous systems of its own within the next 18 to 24 months. The goal is to fight fire with fire, or more accurately, to fight swarms with swarms. The logic is clear. If the enemy can produce $20,000 weapons that threaten billion-dollar assets, then the United States must produce its own low-cost systems that can negate that advantage. However, this transition is not just about building new hardware. It requires a complete overhaul of military bureaucracy, procurement, and doctrine. For decades, the defense industrial base has been optimized to produce a small number of exquisite, high-performance machines over many years. Now, it must learn to produce millions of good-enough machines in a matter of weeks. This is a cultural shock to a system that has long equated quality with high cost. Beyond the hardware, there is the deeper question of international law and the ethics of autonomous warfare. As drones become more capable of making targeting decisions without human intervention, the world faces a terrifying prospect of wars that escalate at machine speed, far beyond the ability of human diplomats to intervene. The geopolitical stakes could not be higher. Adversaries like Iran, Russia, and China are watching these developments closely, refining their own drone doctrines to exploit the lingering vulnerabilities of the West. They understand that the goal is not necessarily to win a traditional battle, but to make the cost of American engagement so high that retreat becomes the only viable option. We are moving into a world where the traditional shield of distance and technological complexity is being stripped away. The safety of 1,000 miles or a billion-dollar defense system is no longer guaranteed. The ultimate lesson of the $20,000 drone is that in the modern age, innovation is the only true currency of power. If the United States cannot adapt its defenses to meet the threat of the many and the cheap, it risks becoming a dinosaur in an age of mammals. The sky is no longer a sanctuary, and the hum of a small engine has become the new sound of global instability. This technology has leveled the playing field, allowing even the most isolated regimes to strike at the heart of the global order. As we move forward, the challenge for the world's most powerful military will be to prove that it can still protect the peace in a world where the tools of war are now available to almost everyone, everywhere, at any time. The future of global security depends on whether the West can rediscover its ability to innovate at the speed of the modern world. If it fails, the era of the superpower may be brought to an end not by a grand final battle, but by the relentless and exhausting hum of $20,000 drones. The shadows over the desert and the sea are growing longer, and the clock is ticking for those who still believe that money alone can buy security.